Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Jeff Parker with Marriage Matters, and I hope I'm finding you well today. Let me encourage you, if you would, to take a moment and like this if you're looking at it on Facebook, and even to share it. Maybe you know somebody that you want to share this with. That would be great. Also, let me encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, and there you can be one of our subscribers and be a part of our Marriage Matters family. Well, today I'm talking on the subject. In fact, I wrote it down here just to kind of put it on the board. But basically, why COVID-19 may not fix your marriage. And you may think, well, that's kind of a strange thought. Why would you talk about COVID-19 and the fact that it cannot fix our marriage or fix my home or even my parenting? Well, let me say this. A lot of times a crisis, and you see this a lot of times in counseling, sometimes a crisis, people will see it as an opportunity or a means by which problems in their marriage can be fixed. Let me give you an example. A couple may be sitting and I'm counseling with them. It's tit for tat, back and forth. You can't seem to reconcile their differences. And at a certain point, I'll look at them and I'll say, this could end like that. And they'll look at me kind of surprised and calm down, and they'll say, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, let's say your cell phone rings and you get a call from the school, and your little girl has fallen out on the playground. They called the ambulance. And when they're talking to you, they said, we were able to revive your little girl, but she clearly has some kind of cardiovascular problem, according to the paramedics. She's on her way to the children's hospital, and they called in a pediatric cardiologist. Now, in that moment, first of all, you're immediately up, running to your vehicle. Both of you are crying. You get in the same vehicle, even though you may have arrived in two different vehicles. You're probably in the same vehicle, and you're speeding, trying to get to the hospital, get to the ER to be with your little girl. Now, in that moment, all the tit for tat, all the problems that you have been dealing with have been set aside because you're in the middle of a crisis. You see, sometimes what happens, a crisis will mask the problems. It's kind of a temporary fix, but it really doesn't fix anything. Let me give you another example. You're on an airplane, and the plane all of a sudden experiences mechanical problems, and the next thing you know, this plane is plummeting downward. In that moment, you reach and take the hands of the people on both sides of you, and in that moment, you're not thinking about their color, you're not thinking about their gender, you're not thinking about their political ideology, you're not thinking about what world religion. It doesn't matter whether they're Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jew, it doesn't matter at that point. You're sitting there holding the hand of another person in a crisis because you think that your life may be coming to an end, and you want people around you. You're not focusing on your differences. You're focusing at that moment on your crisis and the fellowship of somebody else. You see, a crisis does not necessarily fix anything, because once that plane, let's say the plane levels off, you eventually land in an airport, you see the person you were holding a moment ago holding their hand 15 minutes later, and you may have completely forgotten. Now you notice all the things that you didn't notice before. You see, a crisis COVID-19 may mask the problems in your home, in your marriage, or as a parent, but it doesn't fix anything unless you incorporate some, what I believe are critical steps in a crisis. Now, number one step is simply this. If I want to maximize the lessons that I've learned through this pandemic, then number one, I want to use this time to point out problems, let's say problems in my marriage, in your marriage. You're pointing out problems. I often say this when counseling. You can't solve a problem if you don't acknowledge it. A lot of times what's happened is you've come home during this pandemic, shelter in place, and a husband and wife have been around each other for a long period of time. You have begun to notice some problems, and possibly problems that you have not noticed before. You may get clarity as to what problems may be in your marriage and in the relationship. And when I say point out, I'm not automatically saying that you point out the problem in your spouse. You may begin with just the general conversation. As we've been home, have you noticed anything? Do you see anything maybe that I can do that might improve our relationship, make our marriage better? A lot of times that's an open-ended question, because if you aim it the other way, you put the person on a defense, and they're not gonna say anything. They're gonna get their defenses up, and they're gonna come back. Let me give you an easy answer. I was listening or reading Wayne Van Horn, who is a brilliant man, on Facebook, and he made this statement about finances. That one of the things that the pandemic has taught couples and families is that every one of us need to be involved in saving and putting away something. We always hear that. Well, we need to save for a rainy day. We need to save for an emergency. But all of a sudden, people are being laid off their jobs. Some of them, my wife has been laid off for weeks, and we didn't know whether she would get her job back or not. Now, in those cases, you may say, one of the problems that I've seen in this pandemic is that we are not prepared for a crisis if it should come financially. So you're pointing out a problem. Secondly, you're processing the problem. In other words, you're trying to find out the meaning. Let me give you an example. What am I learning in this pandemic about me? Now, I'm not talking about your marriage. I'm not talking about you as a parent. I'm not even talking about our illustration or example a moment ago, your finances. First of all, what are you learning about yourself? In other words, what am I learning? There was a movie years ago by Harrison Ford called Regarding Henry. In this movie, Regarding Henry, this character Harrison Ford plays, Henry, is a really high-powered lawyer in New York City. And him and his wife come home from one of these big social events. And so the wife is relieving the babysitter, checking on the little girl. And he says to his wife, Henry, he says, I'm going to run down and pick up a pack of cigarettes. He goes down to a little convenience store to get a pack of cigarettes. And the next thing you know, he gets in the middle of an armed robbery and he's shot. He wakes up weeks later, basically having to relearn how to walk, how to eat, how to function as a human being. One day he's sitting in the kitchen in his home when his therapist, and the language in it is questionable, and I wouldn't recommend it. This was during my lost days before I got a good dose of Jesus. But he looks at the therapist and he makes this statement. He said, ever since this accident, the more I learn about Henry, the more I don't like him. In other words, as he looks back before the crisis, this man, this high-powered lawyer, was an individual that as now on the other side of the crisis, he's looking back and looking at this figure, he doesn't even like him. And he realizes the damage that this man has been in the life of his wife and his daughter and his friendships and even in his career. Let me ask you something. Have you taken a moment in this pandemic to share with the person you love the most, and not just your spouse, maybe your children, maybe a close friend? Let me tell you what God is teaching me about me. In other words, putting the mirror on yourself. Secondly, what are you learning about relationships? All of a sudden, husband and wife stuck there in the house. They're having to learn how to get along, how to talk to each other. They're learning how to stay busy without coming down on the other. So what are you learning about relationships? What are you learning about your relationship with your children? Going back to Henry, this Harrison Ford character, after the accident, he's sitting at the kitchen table, and it's after his therapy, and it's breakfast, and the little girl reaches, and when she spills her orange juice, he reaches to try to wipe it up, and when he does, she jumps back. And in that moment, Harrison Ford, this man Henry, this lawyer, realizes what kind of dad he's been to his little girl. And he looks at her for a moment. He understands in that moment that he was a harsh, hard man, but now he's different after this crisis. And he reaches over and he knocks his orange juice over, and then he knocks over the orange juice of his wife. And then he begins to laugh. And eventually they realize that their dad is changing. You see, the pandemic, this crisis, this shelter in place, may be giving you a good idea of the kind of man, the kind of woman, the kind of husband, the kind of wife, the kind of mom, the kind of dad that you've been. And you may not like that person. And you may say, you know what, I want to change. And then also, what does it reveal about your relationship with Jesus Christ? For some of you, you have no excuse any longer not to pick up that Bible that sits there by your easy chair and not to pick up that Sunday school material or that reading material and begin to focus on your relationship with Christ. You know, church, you can't even use church as an excuse. You've had to build an intimate personal relationship with Christ outside of the normal props that may prop up this relationship that you have with Jesus. And so what is the pandemic? What is this crisis revealing about your relationship? Now, so we're pointing out a problem, we're processing that problem, and then thirdly, we want to put into practice, once we recognize some areas of our life we want to change, in our marriage, in our parenting, or even in our own personal walk with Christ. Once we recognize a problem, let's go back to our earlier illustration example. Let's say finances. Well, if you say, you know, this caught us by surprise. Had it not been for the stimulus package, had it not been for unemployment, had it been not for the additional money that has been attached to the unemployment, we would not have been able to make it. But how do you know that the government will always be ready to do that? We had an national problem. What if it's a personal family problem where all of a sudden somebody's injured and you are losing an income? Do you have the ability to take care of your financial obligations for a period of time? So you may say, well, I see that problem. I've processed it, meaning I've thought about my spending habits and the spending habits of my family. Number three, I want to do something about it. So we are, as a husband, as a wife, as a family, we are going to begin to set aside a certain amount of our income for an emergency such as what we've experienced. You see, you're not only acknowledging an area or a problem, you're also developing some new habits or practices that will ensure that you're able to solve that problem, whatever that problem may be. You know, you always get interested in parents who put charts up. You ever seen this? Teachers do this. They'll put up a chart, they'll have a child's name, you get a gold star, or you get a black star, blue star, green star, whatever it may mean. The reality is the star represents achievements, making progress. So the reality is, maybe you need to, as even an adult, put up a chart to simply say, we're going to begin to make some changes in our home. So again, as we kind of close out this video, this pandemic, COVID-19, shelter in place, being laid off from your job, living on limited access, you know, the ability not to go eat out all the time, the ability not to be able to just run, do this, do that, just stay on the go. All of a sudden, you're having to be at home. All of this is the golden opportunity to finally say, what has this crisis revealed in my life and in the relationships of the people that I love? And what has it revealed in my relationship with Christ? What do I want to change? And then how do I want to make those changes? Well, we're out of time. I just want to share these things with you. I hope that during this time that you're close to the Lord, closer than you've ever been before. I hope you're beginning to rebuild strength and make that marriage what you want it to be. Maybe you're building better relationships with your children. But let me tell you, don't let it end here. Once you get back to a life of normal, whatever normal is, maybe you need to implement some practices. I told my wife, imagine you're going to your life back to normal. You're on your way to your job, and on your way, all of a sudden, Jesus Christ is sitting in the car next to you. And he looks at you and he says, let me ask you, what has this crisis revealed about you personally? What has this crisis revealed about your marriage, you as a parent? What has this crisis revealed, Jesus said in your car, as to my relationship with you? What changes can we make? Well, God bless you. I hope this has helped. Let me again encourage you to like this, share it, and go to our YouTube channel and subscribe as well. If you have a problem or you have a difficulty, you can send that to me. Email jeffparker@ssbaptistchurch.com, and there I'll see that, and maybe I can get an answer back to you. If you think of a topic you'd like for me to discuss, you can send that as well, or you can message me on Facebook. All of our stuff is available at ssbaptistchurch.com. PastorJeffParker.com is another place that you can go. Books and blogs and other things are available. Well, God bless you. I love you. Take care. Bye-bye.